we want to understand the behavioral and how can we make this integrate correct, because we're not going to go from one day, it's not going to be a light switch on and then off. It's going to be a 5-year, 10-year progress until we get to all vehicles being autonomous, if that's what we want it to be, right? So how can we behaviorally start to accept this and integrate this into what we're doing, get people excited, educate them, and better understand where the technology is going, and try to understand that early in the process so that we don't go create something that says, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, it's going to change your world, but then nobody buys it, nobody wants it, because maybe we didn't look at the behavioral issues and the factors that could have helped to integrate this into our lives, right? Because if it doesn't help save us time or money, then, at the end of the day, why use it?
That's Marcus Strom, founder of the Autonomous Driving Research, a nonprofit organization on autonomous driving to evaluate, challenge, inform, and propose solutions for vehicles, drivers, operators, and infrastructure agencies for the successful integration of the autonomous driving vehicle.
You're listening to the Multifamily Leadership Podcast with Patrick Antrim, your source for success strategies for multifamily professionals, CEOs, executive leaders, and aspiring leaders that want to drive high-performance results for their property or portfolio.
This is Patrick Antrim, founder and CEO of Multifamily Leadership and producer of the Multifamily Leadership Summit, where top multifamily executives come together in a one-of-a-kind leadership summit to design fresh ideas for the future of multifamily. Welcome to the Multifamily Leadership Podcast, where I speak to executive leaders, authors, and business leaders on the topics that advance leadership in multifamily. It is our goal to give you insight into what top leaders are doing to re-envision the leasing experience and leading the apartment of the future. If you'd like to get access to other resources like videos, articles, show notes, other episodes of this podcast, or information on working with me, you can visit multifamilyleadership.com. So, Marcus, I've been doing some research on the impact of autonomous vehicles and where we're going and where we're heading, and I looked at, there's almost 260 million vehicles on the road, and it's been a while since I even thought, why do I even need to know this information? 2 billion parking spaces, over 125,000 gas stations, and streets are 25 to 30% of a city's land value. I mean, these are obvious things here. And cars, now this is something I can relate to personally, is your car is parked 95% of the time, and this autonomous driving shared vehicle experience, it seems like it just makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a lot of cars and a lot of land we're taking up. The utilization of a vehicle is nowhere near what it could be. I mean, we have these cars that are out there that are, from a quality perspective, built really well, but we're not using them as much as we could from a utilization perspective. And so I think when we get into autonomous vehicles, I think that's going to help pull that out.
Yeah, and there's a safety impact to this. Not only how this is going to impact real estate, but just there's a lot of research. You're leading that program to advance the research on this program. So then, tell me about the research. There's the actual vehicle, the technical, and then how does it reach into like the social? Where people feel like, is this just something they're going to accept, or how does that
so the research I'm looking at is, there's different aspects of it. One is the vehicle and the sensors and the safety behind that. I think the number one driver that all the different organizations, whether they be OEM manufacturers or they actually be IT tech, like the Googles and the Intels, is safety. We're approaching, actually, I think there was a increase now of 5% over in 2016 for the number of road deaths. So we're approaching 40,000 in a year. So that's one major driver, at least for the United States, that we want to bring down. And in the world, I think it's like over 1 million is killed per year in vehicle accidents that I think autonomous vehicles could try to solve. The other one is, of course, utilization of the vehicle. And then a big one here is, how are we going to maybe increase productivity as well. So safety, how can we use our resources more? And then how can we look at it from a productivity perspective? Because if I don't have to think about driving anymore, and I'm just using that car for that 5 or 10%, but it may be really an hour or 2 hours in driving or 3 hours every day in the car, could I be doing something else in that space as well? So these are kind of the main drivers of autonomous vehicles that gets it an exciting event right now for transportation.
That's fascinating. You know, it's interesting you say the productivity part, because that's a positive impact. I mean, you know, companies are dispersing their employees around the world. There's a lot of more, you know, consulting projects going on. They're traveling more. I mean, when I'm on an airplane, some of my best work, I've written a book on an airplane because I was not distracted.
Right.
You know, I wasn't. And you know, of course, the pilot was, and he's probably an autopilot anyway.
Yeah, well, absolutely, absolutely.
Or she, but and so, you know, my best work has been on that because I was just in my zone, and I knew I had a ticket, and it told me, hey, I'm going to be here at this time, and I trusted that. I bought into that process.
Right, absolutely.
And while I'm waiting, you know, you watch a movie, or you know, how you want to be productive is a whole nother level. Mm-hmm. But for me, I've accomplished some great work while doing that. And so it makes me think about how people define where they really want to live too, because if now commuting is not really a problem, will, you know, other, you know, real estate developments outside the city increase in value, right? Or you know, decrease in value? What are the impacts to this in terms of real estate? How people move around the city, those types of things. And we'll follow up with how it impacts the actual real estate itself, parking and those kinds of things. But I'm curious about, you know, the behaviors that are changing. Tell me about your time at Google. Were they thinking through, you know, this acceptance? Is that a big topic?
Yeah, I mean, Google has spent significant resources and time and engineering in ensuring that they're producing a product that will increase safety. I mean, that's the number one thing. We need to reduce that ability. But again, at the same time, they need to also learn what it takes to, you know, they did the DARPA challenge back in 2007, or they got the folks from that to pull those guys together to make this happen. And, you know, what they're learning is, you know, there's a lot of time and a lot of scenarios that have to be comprehended. I mean, it's one thing to go down the highway and put the cruise control on and stay between two lanes. But it's a different if you are, you know, in a city with moving objects all the way around you. And if you do want to claim to be the safest vehicle out there, you start having to look at a perspective that we're not used to as humans. You need to start looking at 360 degrees around the vehicle all the time. So from that angle, it's something where they're wanting to try to make sure that the technology, and when we're talking about the vehicle integration, we're talking about the software and the knowledge base behind what's driving the vehicle, as well as all the sensors that are now necessary to be able to take this on. I mean, it's more than just cameras necessarily. To get a accurate picture in all types of conditions. We're having to think about not only dry desert conditions as the testing we're doing here in Chandler, but we also have to think, of course, the East Coast. We have to think about cold weather, maybe even warmer weather, and not only the United States, but also around the world. So we've got to kind of comprehend that if we want to take this on, not be a United States solution also, but a worldwide solution. So there's a lot of learning that has to happen, and that can only be done by accumulating the miles and being in a real world environment to try to, I mean, you can do so much in simulation, but at the end of the day, it's those 1% to 2% edge cases that can get you. It's those things that, you know, you may have not comprehended in a certain fashion at a certain time with the light at the certain angle, right, and obscurity. And then there's a little bit of rain and a little ice, and, you know, and then those all come together. You know, that could be a life, right? That could happen if it wasn't autonomous. And so how do, you know, as a company that's looking to develop this, how do they incorporate that into the learning? So it's a huge program that's underway, but many millions of miles have been real world driven as well as simulated driven to try to understand all these things, to make this something as we as humans can behaviorally accept.
Right. And you know, it's creeping into assisting drivers now. I mean, in my vehicle, it's brought me to attention in blind spots, just signaling. And when I have my signal on, it tells me, hey, it can see around me. I can't see that 360. That's fascinating what you're sharing there, because, you know, the technology and also the trust in it. We were talking earlier on our way to get some coffee about stoplights, and how we do trust that. And that's a computer program, right? And it knows traffic patterns. And I don't know the information of how they decide when a light turns red or green, but when the light's green, I mean, we all kind of just agree, like,
we accept
we're moving forward.
We understand just from our behavior and being exposed to that system. I mean, traffic lights are nothing but a small system that we as humans have adapted to that and understand that if we do see that, the green light to walk, we understand that any other risks of any other traffics and their right of way have been stopped so that we can just walk. That's going to have to happen for autonomous driving as well. And that's kind of some of the work that I'm looking at is, how are we behaviorally going to start to accept this and integrate this? Because there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of stuff about it coming out tomorrow. But at the same time, we have to put things in place and be sure we educate people about autonomous vehicles and where it's going to come and how we're going to actually grow that so that it becomes more accepted and not something to be feared.
Right. And what's interesting is those people have commented that it's almost like, when the automotive first came on, the type of change and impact to the world of just the automotive. Mm-hmm. And also even the personal computer, how that changed our world in how we communicate with others and how we transact. But the difference I think here, and I may be wrong on this, but is that we're computing at such fast speeds, the exponential growth from time of, this isn't going to be 30 years, right? I mean, we're going fast. If I think back at when we're looking at apartment developments on Google, we can literally go into a city across the nation and see from an aerial street view, walk down the street with Google's technology there with the map, the 3D maps. And it wasn't long when I was in probably 2007 traveling to do due diligence on a property and renting a car and being upcharged the $9.95 for the Garmin, for
the Garmin or the TomTom,
and that wasn't long ago. And now here we are, and it's just something that it's on my phone, and we can be where we need to be. So, what do we need to be worried or thinking about this now as real estate operators?
Absolutely. Because we are in that accelerated pace of technology acceptance, I think it's something that we have to integrate and understand. It's coming. It will come. And having been in the driver's seat of one of these vehicles and experienced it day in and day out, it is pretty fascinating. It is something that if we don't do that now, you could be left behind or be something to catch up, and that's opportunity for somebody else, right? So again, it will happen. Autonomous vehicles are coming. It's just a question of what's the best way to approach this and really understand what that could be for whomever is going to be touched by it.
Right. And I know you're doing some top secret work and you can't share a lot of specifics, but I mean, these vehicles, they're moving around, they're collecting quite a bit of data.
That's correct.
Can you go into any explanation about how the process, not the technical process or any secrets about how things work?
Yeah. So in general, just to kind of help the listeners understand, I mean, there's multiple sensors out there, and you could read a lot of articles about different manufacturers using different kinds of sensors. I mean, we have visual cameras, which we think of as our own eyes. We're taking audio. But we're also looking for ways to go beyond visual sight, which is our limitation as drivers. And now we're looking into what's LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, where we're using laser light to literally send out signals 360 degrees around and wait for that reflection to come back. So we can actually see things at night. We don't need light, which is awesome. And then we use radar, which is, in World War II technology, searching for motion. So if you think about, we're trying to look, from a vehicle's perspective, 360 degrees, we want to be able to capture that data. If you think about us today, we're in a vehicle. And if you don't have, like you said, the kind of the lane keep assist or the blind spot monitoring and thing, it's just our eyes. We have two cameras. I kind of think of it as two cameras
if
in our
they're
head.
on the road.
And if they're being used correctly. But yeah, I mean, just if you think about the amount of data that we're collecting around the vehicle to try to be safe. And here I can give a great example, and this happened to me personally in driving the vehicle. typical, very high density four-way intersection lit with a two lanes turning left. I'm in this self-driving vehicle and it's driving itself, and the left arrows turn on to make this left-hand turn. There's 2 lanes turning left, so it's what we call a protected left. I'm on the inside and I start to go, and then the car slows down automatically. And of course, I'm just kind of like looking, trying to understand why it's slowing. I got the person behind me honking. I got the guy in the next right-hand turn lane, gunning it around. And then as we slowly creep around, and we're in the intersection, we're coming around the bend, there comes now a person walking right across the street that a truck on the left had completely obscured. So in essence, what had happened is the car was already tracking that individual crossing the street on my left to opposing traffic, which not in the crosswalk, it was between traffic. That car had picked that up and noticed its trajectory. Wow. So by the time it knew that they were going to converge, and so the car just slowed down. And then, of course, the person that was going to get on my outside, he'd end up nailing his brakes and threw up his hands. But we just calmly stopped. And that to me was the aha moment and personally experiencing this power of 360-degree sensors on these type of autonomous vehicles. Absolutely. If anybody was flying around that corner, it could have had a different outcome.
Wow. That's a powerful story.
And that happened to me personally. So,
I mean, you think, like you just said, I mean, we don't see 360. No. We don't have radar light, all these things.
No. You could be on your phone. You could be messing with the radio. Could have taken a bite of sandwich. You're not looking to your due left 90 degrees to somebody who's kind of walking in traffic, not in the crosswalk, but amongst traffic, which was something you don't think of.
Right. I want to talk to you a little bit about parking later, but take me inside one of these vehicles. What's it look like? There's so much built up excitement of, oh my God, this is the car of the future. But in essence, it looks just like a normal vehicle. Mm-hmm. Right.
Other than, the things on the outside, you'll see, some different sensors and things, manufacturer, trying to still figure out what the best placement is. But on the inside, it literally still looks like a normal vehicle. In some of the cars we were using at Google, you have full control still. So we still have the steering wheel, you still have the gas and the brake, you still have the lever to control. It is all there. And at a moment's notice, everything was set up that you could just barely touch the steering wheel or the gas or the brake, and it would disengage itself, so that you could have full control. And it was very smooth. It wasn't something jerky. You could literally just touch the steering wheel for maybe a half a degree and it would kick itself out, and then it would just say, it's kicked out and you now have control. So in a way, I think that's a great testament of, in my case with Google and experience with Waymo, is to try to make it something that we accept quickly. And it's nothing that is going to be George Jetson, pie in the sky. It's going to take me over and take me where, no, we still have, control. But again, the point is that maybe we don't get to that. We get to somewhere where there is no control because there is enough confidence in that system. But I think it's going to take time to grow. But in the inside, it looks all the same. Maybe just a couple of screens that look a little bit bigger,
sure.
And just to give you an idea of what the car is looking at and sensing. But other than that, there's not much real change.
Really?
Yeah.
And in terms of parking, a lot of the real estate developers that are listening in would love to figure out a solution for parking. It's been an impact to the business, and as rents rise over time and people consolidate and roommates, and you have impact to how many carports or parking garages are needed for each development, and it's a huge cost. Concrete cost, the labor cost to construct it, the land cost, and I'm wondering if you've are you doing any work to integrate? Is it through the city first or planners, or how do you get developers to start talking to cities about these things? Either forecasting, reduced parking allowances in anticipation of some of this research that you're doing, because, when a developer builds a property and then even manages it, I mean, they're looking at long term in many cases. And so how do you plan, for 30 years in this environment as a developer?
I think some of that in thinking about experience now in how we're using rideshare today and car hailing with Ubers and the Lyfts, trying to better understand the population that are renting now and actually using that services now could help give us an indicator of what it's going to be like, because then obviously they don't need to own a car. They're hailing a car, except now we got a human driver, but at some point that human driver will no longer be there. So the question may be, what are the tenants now doing with rideshare, and are they tracking any of that kind of information from their tenants today to try to better understand where that's going to go? And let me get one example is great. I'm using actually Lyft. Not only have I used Lyft as a user, but I'm also as a driver. And the reason I'm also driving is because it's giving me a great conduit right to the passengers to ask them about autonomous driving and self-driving and find out about fears. And a lot of my passengers, I would say probably about 50% of my passengers go into an apartment or townhome or condo type area. And so, right away, that gives me a sense of what are the complexities going into an apartment complex, gated areas. Where do we pick up? I mean, there's been a lot of frustration on where the car should be when they pick up, or can the system...
That can impact your reviews, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. It's just like, please, no, I'm trying to find you. I can find you. But if I think about it from a computer perspective, it's very discrete, meaning that, if you put a pin somewhere of where you're going to be, it's literally going to show up right on that pin. And then there's no other negotiation. There's no call the driver and say, hey, could you move up a little bit more? Or I'm at the clubhouse instead. Right. You're going to have to actively manage that vehicle to be able to do that. So again, going back to planning and understanding, what this impact could be, it is so brand new. It is so, the larger organizations are still just trying to get the cars to function, let alone what is the entire network structure going to look like and the impact. But that shouldn't stop us from planning now. So my advice would be look at ride sharing and try to understand from tenants today, how much are they using? Because that's going to be a great indicator for us, not only of the utilization of that platform of car and ride sharing, but also give us an understanding of, if they're doing that, where are they doing their pickups? Are they doing it at their door? Are they doing it at the front in the main entrance? How are they navigating or getting, asking them what are some of the issues or things they do and don't like about that can give us some understanding of how much of an acceleration. If you're doing this, every 6 months, you can maybe start tracking and seeing what kind of metrics there are for this that you see, oh my gosh, year after year, it's increasing, or number of parking areas being used is actually starting to decrease. You're starting to collect that data because there's going to be a great correlation between ride sharing and autonomous vehicles right there.
Right. And you need this collaboration, right? What's the teams? You have the developers of the technology, you've got the automotive companies, you have the users, the people, accessing the cars. You have the real estate developers, city, and all these. I mean, how do you pull all these teams together? And what can real estate developers do to help open that discussion, I guess?
I think, again, there's so many players. I mean, from vehicles to sensors to software to the end users to government from the perspective of regulation. I mean, there's just recently was some announcements from the federal government about, what are some of the boundary conditions for autonomous vehicles and how they can operate. I think a lot of it should be, asking the question of what is being used now for, again, ride sharing, just because that is what this will look like. A lot of it can be, if there are opportunities out there in the world now or in your area to try to take part in doing some kind of collaboration with some vehicle testers. So for example, here in the Phoenix Valley, I mean, you have Google and Waymo basically doing stuff out of Chandler. You have GM and Cruise doing stuff in Scottsdale. You have Uber doing stuff in Tempe. Are there possible opportunities there to reach out and see if they can run some of their part of their tests actually on part of your properties,
right.
And see if we can do some pickups and deliveries and actually designate those areas and try to collect data, not only for them, but for you guys as well, to better understand from a property perspective, the layout and start to understand what that system is. Having been, again, going back to the experience of being in the vehicle and having done some of these pickups and drop-offs with an autonomous vehicle, there is a lot of work to do. When you think of gated communities, how is a computerized car going to go through a gated community and access that correctly and be at the right place at the right time? And what makes sense for the roundabout area, usually typically in the front of a apartment complex for the main entrance.
Right.
if you take away the parking locations, I mean, how much larger does that have to be if you have everybody leaving for a 7, 8, or 9 a.m. job start time, right? I mean, how is that going to look, and how could that impact? So maybe there's opportunities to, and we're lucky here in the Phoenix Valley because these companies have picked our area to start off testing. If we could engage there and see if we can start that conversation, have those, because right now we haven't had that, at least the experience that I've had so far, in having that direct communication with maybe us mapping those apartment communities to try to see if we can better service them. But again, for the apartment owners and the community there to better understand our end as well. So you can see, what's the pull, what's the demand, and how, what are the intricacies necessary to be able to pull this off.
Right.
There's some great opportunity here.
Well, down here in downtown Scottsdale, you see the cars driving around, and it's always a head turner, and everyone's like, "What is that?
Yeah,
how's it going?" And I would think that I love your suggestion there, because if there's an apartment manager, developer, and they want to open up their property to, advance, get out and get in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
On this process, then number one, they're helping the innovation. They're going to be the first to hear about what needs to be done, probably.
Yeah.
But secondly, it's interesting, and so maybe people would raise their hand to volunteer for something like that, and help accelerate the learning, because that's what it's about. I mean,
yes.
The simulations probably are happening on roadways and streets, city streets, and I'm sure they've integrated with the city and that process at some level.
Yeah, I know. Just the experience with Waymo. They're intricately talking with the city of Chandler to better understand, roadways and closures and things like that, to make it as smooth as possible. Waymo had recently opened up to request for people who wants to be part of Passengers, or the kind of the early start program. It's on their website. And that is also a great opportunity there to maybe partner with Waymo to say, hey, we'll communicate something in our apartment property to say, hey, this is happening, and we're going to partner, for example, with Waymo or with Cruise or with Uber. And it's to say, hey, we'd like to be, also be part of this when you start actually taking rides from people. And we'd like to open up the community and kind of make that partnership. I think that's a great low hanging fruit opportunity for folks to really get it now, because it is happening now. I mean, yes, we're seeing those cars as exciting every time. Yeah, I see a Waymo van or an Uber Volvo. I'm like, wow, this is amazing with the stuff spinning and all that. It's happening now. So kind of back to your original question. Yeah, we definitely need to engage now, because it is happening and it's massively exciting.
Well, let's talk about that sort of surprise. I mean, we look at the innovations that are happening in other areas. I mean, we've got the Airbnb shared model where, a lot of large, even real estate operators, the hotels and hotel chains didn't see that coming, and it happened very quickly. Of course, that was more of a disruptive stress for some, because they're trying to figure out how to manage it and position themselves appropriately. But it was a great opportunity for a lot of the people that were traveling, and how we see the user experience just with shared rent or shared, Uber and Lyft and these types of services. When you think about the user experience, I mean, the goal in my mind is like, gosh, this is wonderful. Drunk driving would now come down.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Right.
And I don't know if there's data on that stuff, but it seems to me that it's just easier to access a car instead of calling a cab or a taxi company, all these things, but it happened so quick. Are there other examples of how, I guess, these businesses that are developing this technology are trying to either market it or introduce it or position it so that the adoption is there?
Yeah, I mean, there are, what we're initially seeing, and I guess, again, Waymo kind of announcing this, doing kind of like a rideshare program and starting to roll that out. I think these companies are doing that because that's where you're going to get the most utilization of a vehicle in doing the ride share. As we were talking earlier, right, 95% of the cars stay idle. So if we can get the most mileage out of these cars, in essence, we're kind of building the AI behind autonomous vehicles and understanding what it takes to drive a car from a human's perspective and try to translate it into a car's perspective. So what's important for us is really trying to understand where can we, integrate that so that it becomes a lot smoother for us to accept. Ride sharing is going to be the first kind of low-hanging fruit again. Public transportation is also a large one. We want to be able to get people to feel that, if you get point A to point B without any issue, you have confidence in the system. And I like to put this into perspective with the train that you use at Sky Harbor Airport that gets you from one of the outbound terminal parking areas and gets you into the terminal. Right, there's no driver there. It is something that you accept. We accept that it's going to get me from point A to point B. It goes up to a decent speed and comes back down and stops and goes where it needs to go. If we can translate more of those transportation type opportunities with autonomous, so city buses, other very defined, discrete location from A to B type transportation. Some of the trains with the rail that's already out there. I mean, we still have an operator there. The question then should be asking, why do we have this operator? What are the use cases that are really necessary to have this operator there? If we can make those autonomous rather quickly, I think we're going to grow even faster the acceptance of autonomous vehicles. And to me, bus traffic is great. I mean, pretty much it's right-hand turns. There's defined bus stops, always in the right-hand lane. This is something that is just massively low-hanging fruit. But then again, there's costs associated to it. So trash pickup,
Sure.
The big thing with, hearing in the news about auto and taking semi-trucks and getting those autonomously driven, so much mileage and so much productivity, again, for the driver can be had, and as well as cost savings for companies to use those vehicles and have those in an autonomous form. So anywhere where we can reduce highway traffic in mileage with autonomous, I think that's going to be the greatest thing. The really complex issue is getting into cities, right? So that's really kind of right now the Achilles tendon, you can kind of say, of getting autonomous vehicles accepted, because it is such a dense and difficult environment. So again, if we can get the periphery done with large transportation and then start pulling this in to have it on a per vehicle basis, and that's kind of how I would see the progression happen. That makes sense.
Yeah. And going back to your point that it is happening, it will happen. And apartment and multifamily operators need to be thinking about it now. It's not too early. I mean, you don't need to go and restripe your parking lots right now, but definitely being a leader in this process would be exciting, but also important to the advancement of this. But maybe this is the wrong question to ask, somebody that like you, head of research. But when we look at data, sometimes we're looking in the rear, like we're looking in what happened. Yeah, right. And so this is something that's really focused on what's next, right, and where the future is going. And so I'm trying to think of how sometimes we don't have the frame of reference. Like, I never thought I needed an iPhone. I didn't know it was a possibility, or even ride sharing was a possibility. So you look at companies that are in the world today that, like, even I mentioned the Kodak story. You've got the digital camera. I mean, they invented the digital camera in 1975 or 1976, and it was ultimately the thing that put them out of, into chapter 11. And, and so at the time when that was introduced, the engineer brought forward this vision of this camera. Well, the camera only had 0.0012 whatever megapixel, and it looked like a toy. That's just, they discounted it. The executives, right? I mean, and smart leadership team discounted. And for 30 years, it was sort of like, just hidden. It took a long time to get to where they're in our phones and, that kind of, the speed at our rate now of that conversation with that first engineer with Kodak and it disrupting an industry is sort of shortened, collapsed.
Yes.
And so my question is, what do you say to somebody that just says, "Oh, I don't see it completely adopting," or maybe I love sports cars. I want to feel the roar of the engine, and I want to be in control of this stuff. But there's other pressures in the world, like Amazon disrupting groceries, and how we're gonna, even 3D printing, where manufacturing is going to change. And if we're talking about having the possibility of having a lower cost product delivered to somebody because a truck can drive 24 hours a day.
Yes.
And by the way, they have trouble finding drivers, right? That's the problem. So that industry is going to say yes, because it's a pain point. And safety and all of these things. And so what do you say to somebody that's just like, I don't see it. Like, I don't see it happening. I mean, do you show them Uber and Lyft, and do you show them these other scenarios, and how do you inspire that?
I think you ask an awesome question, and you actually just touched on my soul there, because I race cars. I actually built a race car and actually race, and I like full on manual. So it's an old Cobra, and I got V8 and stick shift and clutch and the whole 9 yards, and power nothing, right? So, but for me, I like there is that old side where we it's trusted and true, and we understand that. Kind of back to your Kodak story. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? It's working, but yet again, we have to move forward. So again, what's exciting about this is that there's contexts of which to use autonomous vehicles. When I don't want to have to commute anymore, and I do unfortunately have that hour or 2 hour commute one way, and I don't want to have to sit and mess with the traffic. I'd rather do this email, or like you said, write a book. During that time, I can do that. But maybe on the weekends, I want to get into my convertible and I want to go rip and roar up the mountains. Absolutely. I think the fallacy here is that we think of it as a 100% replacement of the vehicle, which it's not. I think it's going to definitely have its positions of where it's going to be and how I'm going to use that transportation. But I think when people start to experience it, and we start to see some of the companies are going to slowly start rolling out, avenues for us to actually get in the vehicle and experience it, go down the street, and not only just go down the street like cruise control, because that doesn't tell us much. It's when you're in a four-way intersection, with people and cars and lights, and there's busyness happening, and the car just slowly goes through or makes that left-hand turn, and you would probably be glued looking at, is it going to hit that person? What's going to happen? And it just goes right through it and does it beautifully. Once we start building that confidence, I think people will start to see the opportunities for them and what it means to them personally of how they can use this technology. Like we said, for trucking, maybe I want to reduce that, the overhead and whether it be, I know this is a sensitive topic about
right.
drivers and cost replacement, but maybe there's productivity that can be had for the driver, let's say, in doing those highway miles, and then maybe going to manual mode when there's more intricate things going on or whatever. But, people need to experience it. I think it's pretty fascinating. And yes, when I'm doing my data collection for Lyft and I'm asking passengers, hey, what do you think about self-driving cars? Yeah, I get 50-50. I never want anybody to drive, my car, and you better be there and you better always drive the car. And I'm actually looking forward to when when my vehicle would actually be self-driving, because then I'd like to see what other kind of possibilities there are. One great example is what Tesla's doing, with the Model 3, and the ability for it to be, you can get the full self-driving package, but also be part of their own ride-sharing network. I mean, think of the possibilities there. That's one great example of saying, hey, I could buy a Tesla Model 3, use it when I need to use it, and when those other 95%, I just turn it over to the system, and then it drives itself and does some ride hailing and earns me some revenue. And then when I need it back, it just has to be back here at 4:00 to pick me up, so I can take it home, or then rip in manual mode up in the mountains. So there's just so many possibilities.
Right.
It's just fascinating. But again, if people experience the technology, and I hope that these tech companies sooner than later, instead of all the hype that we're reading in the news articles, how things are coming 2020, 21, everything's going to change, have people start experiencing it now, slowly but surely. I think where the adoption rate's going to happen much quicker than we would expect.
Well, you've got AI, BI, and then we focus on the HI, the human intelligence. So if we can figure out how to associate that. So is ownership changing? I mean, we're looking at what it means to own a home. the question that you've probably grown up and heard, which is should you rent versus buy?
Yeah.
And now the conversation is moving towards, well, that's the wrong, it's access now,
Yeah, we need to fundamentally look at like autonomous driving in a different light. Everybody asks me in my field, when's it coming? When can I buy one? That may be the incorrect question. The question maybe we should asking is, when can I be able to experience this, or when can I take part in it, not necessarily own it? Because if we are trying to go to that perspective of not owning that vehicle or having it 95% unutilized, why do I need to buy it? Maybe I could just use it. And so that's the real question that we should be asking ourselves, because how good it drives itself is what those developers are worrying about. So you can get safely from A to B, and that is the primary goal. But in the midterm, what are you going to do now? We as humans haven't thought about, well, shoot, when I'm in a car, I'm usually driving it. Here in this perspective now, what can I be doing? Because I'm not going to focus on that driving. You'll see some of the designers that's come out from Frankfurt and some of the auto shows where they're showing concept vehicles with, seats turning inward, or the windows aren't actually, they're no longer transparent. They're opaque because they're displays and they have all your work on them. So literally you're doing all your work in the vehicle going down the road, because you don't need to use your brain power now to even assess the vehicle and what it's doing. This is the true level 4, level 5 that they talk about, so that you're no longer conscious about the driving. You're just in it to experience it. And maybe there's a clock in the corner that tells you got 5 minutes to go until you arrive. And, that's what you're worried about, not the experience of driving necessarily, but what you can do while you're in motion. So that's the question we should be looking at. I think that's because you're going to have this productivity piece that's going to be so it's just like untapped gold, I guess you could say, in our lives, because we're always looking for more time. But in this perspective, it's a question that, why should I necessarily have to own the vehicle?
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that, just like airline flight, it's, from what I understand, what the world and the media that I've seen is that it's the safest way to travel in terms of passengers moved and all of that stuff. And here we don't see forward or backward at all. And we've got this little tiny little window that's not really anything you can look at.
No.
Anyway, but we do accept that, we're not in control here, and we're of course being guided by a human pilot. But of course, many times the buttons and the technology in that aircraft, moving to the automotive is fascinating with all the sensors and all these things. And you still have people that are afraid to fly.
Absolutely.
You're probably going to have that.
I think you will. I think, for those hardcore folks that really love to drive, I think they will definitely be skeptical for quite some time.
Well, they'll be safer on the road because they won't get hit. Because it's not always being in an accident. It's like, the act that led to, reacting because, somebody ran a red light or what have you.
That's correct. They may not be the direct implication of that, but they've also either be impacted by it or have heard somebody or a family member has been in that kind of environment, and they're concerned about it. Mm-hmm. But again, back to the manufacturers and the folks that are providing this technology to start to open people's eyes and, give those demonstrations, because it is rather moving, especially to me as a car guy, loves cars and loved cars my whole life. This is just one other avenue that is just extremely fascinating because it is growing so quickly, and it's here today. It actually, it is happening.
Yeah. And I know the late Steve Jobs was talking about even the automobile being the next mobile device, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to name companies because I'm not familiar with who's working on what, but there's some different positioning where they're working on, instead of thinking of it like the vehicle, but more of like the software that drives the vehicle, and what experience can be collected there. And I'm just always fascinated on, is this going to increase the value of a local apartment community who, by the way, when they design and develop, they are looking at how to create, give back time to people, right? Take away the maintenance of a home and all that stuff. So in a lot of ways, the apartment developers are really trying to create a lifestyle experience, give people their freedom back, their time back, in a real estate physical way. And they design amenities and things like that. And so when you look at that being disrupted by the shared rental experience where people can actually access that, not own it, not rent it, not be on the contract, but access it without really being, part of, a 12-month lease or a 2-year lease.
Right.
Then, but I'm always, curious, because when you underwrite and you purchase and you develop and you plan to acquire a multifamily property and apartment portfolio, a lot of focus is on jobs and, access to, work centers and highways and even, airports and ports, because these are the fundamentals that, lenders and asset managers look at in the ability to create the kind of returns for that property. And so manufacturing is changing, where companies are going to be locating could be changing in this scenario. And so as owners and developers do their background and due diligence and evaluating this stuff, it's fascinating to know, like, they should be looking at this in terms of roadways. And, now you might be able to tap a demographic outside of your normal region of what you thought your competition was or your market was, and redefine these metropolitan statistical areas.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I mean, that's changing.
Absolutely. I mean, you can now look at, because you're not constrained. You're not constrained to that small environment anymore. You can have, if you're using, vehicles like this on demand and literally like in an autonomous state, and you can load balance, for example, where these vehicles need to be, and know that you have tenants that are in, you can obtain this kind of information of where your tenants go and what they're doing. You can better place the resources so that time is never wasted. If you have somebody that wants to live, in Scottsdale, but they have to commute down to Chandler, and you have for example, an autonomous vehicle that knows, in the system from an AI perspective, knows that that's kind of the commute that they do, and they know the hour. Matter of fact, they could maybe find a better hour and a better time. And they may even alert your tenant to say, hey, you may need to leave 10 minutes earlier than expected, because we want to get you to save you the most time. Then you're no longer constrained saying, I have to live in Chandler to work in Chandler, but I can go here and there, but I can now be productive on my way down to Chandler and get ready. I could maybe do a bunch of pre-work. Those, like you mentioned, time savings will be huge. I think this is a great opportunity to try to have those, property owners look with the technical folks here when it comes to transportation, and trying to really maybe foster some kind of, partnerships now early, because the density, of course, for the properties that you guys are working on, just go hand in hand with the density of the vehicles needed to service this. So I think it's a great opportunity to be able to partner now. Again, as I mentioned, we've got tech companies rolling cars now. Would be a great opportunity to get in there and have those discussions.
That's great. There's much opportunity for apartment operators and developers, managers, and and it's great for the technology too, because one operator can influence multiple buildings and these types of programs throughout their portfolio. Whereas in the single family market, I mean, you're talking about getting every American to think about reworking their garage space. Do they even need it anymore? Or right. Even when you build plans, if I built a house today, would I build a garage? Right. These types of things. And so it's probably much easier to impact innovation and change through the apartment portfolio, because they're already trying to create this livable experience with people. And it probably doesn't work in every property, every portfolio, but definitely it's something to be thinking about. Following up on, we've been talking a lot about, how users will access the vehicles, but let's talk about when these vehicles are not in service, and could potentially be an opportunity for, even gas stations that are no longer needed because they're going to electrical and all these things, to have these sort of parking areas or storage areas, or maybe they can park closer together because they don't need to open doors and close doors, right? Because they're just storing them. So your parking areas could be amenitized into this service area, for properties. Can we explore the service aspect of actually?
Yeah, so they're kind of the other there's the other end of the spectrum here, where we have cars available and they show up whenever we want them to be. But then at the there are also going to be dead times for those vehicles. The great thing, the holy grail for autonomous vehicles is also that they're electric, because then we don't have to deal with a lot of the maintenance issues that we do in a normal combustion engine. But those have to be parked somewhere to either get charged or wait for that. So even in a perfect world would be everything's load balanced and we got vehicles just slowly buzzing around, maybe not using too much energy, but they are kind of placed throughout the area on a demand basis. But those still will have to be charged and parked somewhere. So that kind of is the contrarian and the opposite view of having this great ability to have on-demand service, but where are they going to park? What are they going to do? And some of the things that is coming up when we're looking at is, what they're doing in Europe for density, and looking at these parking structures that are fully, automated, in which you, as a user, would literally pull your car in to basically drive onto a tray, and then you get out and you don't mess with your car ever again. And it literally will take that tray and place this tray in a very densely packed kind of garage system of where that vehicle would then be stored. And when you need it, you can pull it up on your phone and it would then be ready at the typical concierge area, and you would just get back in your car and drive away. So if we take the human element out of it, where we don't need to have you park there, but these cars would then have to go there and charge somewhere, or be maintained or something. There is also a great opportunity here to try to determine what that's going to look like and where we're going to go with that. One great example is Volkswagen's in Wolfsburg, Germany, where they store all their cars after they've produced them. They have this big, huge multi-story rotunda, fully operated. You can pull it up on the internet. It's rather awesome to watch. Maybe give you guys some links to look at, but it's a great idea of what that future probably would look like when you have vehicles that need to be stored, but very densely, because we don't have to worry about them opening doors. You don't have to walk to them, because you just have a tray that goes up, pulls it out and puts it down, and has the car back on the street and ready to go. So there's opportunities there of like how, a great world would be, cars are just show up when I need them. But the reality is they're still a physical object. They still need to be somewhere. They still need to be maintained. They still need to have some source of charging or have some kind of fuel. So that still has to happen. So there may be opportunities here as well. And where I see some opportunity is when you have a very dense living environment and you have a bunch of your tenants at 7, 8, and 9 a.m. need vehicles. Can we pre-charge and have those ready for them so that literally they just pull up into the rotunda and pick somebody up one after another, but they're already ready to go, or they're very close to that location so that they're ready to go. That's another opportunity that I see that could be.
Wow. So you're saying when I was 5 playing with my Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars in that stacking garage, that was the future?
You nailed it, man. That's exactly it right there. Yeah, no, that's exactly the type of what we're going to see, because they are still physical objects. We can't get past that, right? I mean, we're until we go into some kind of energy state where we're not physical. No, I'm not condoning that.
Right.
But yes, it's still an object, right? And so, but yes, they will need to be stored and maintained somehow, some way. Again, because if you do have an EV vehicle constantly roaming, you're using that energy, right? Which just decreases the range on that vehicle. So, it's better to be able to kind of hold and isolate and try to load balance. The system will figure out where is the best based on demand. But then again, if you think about, spring training here, you think about the events at ballparks where you suddenly have massive amounts of people, concerts, and you now have, this is a problem that still has yet to be, truly ironed out, and what that's going to look like so that it is smooth and people can find their vehicles and they can get in them and transport. And so those are some things out there that they're great opportunities.
Well, there's certainly some marketing opportunities to help advance the mindset to accept all of these strategies and opportunities and innovations that are happening. And what brings to my mind is, that I keep going back to the airline travel, and it's probably I was told early, don't talk about what you don't know. And so I'm going to go ahead and break that rule right now. But I'm imagining with this load balancing and even just looking at Google Maps and all of these different ways that can pinpoint location and predict timing. But I look at how I can purchase an airline flight 6 months in advance, 4 months in advance, and it knows the time that's going to be there, and it's factoring that, and it's knowing the flight plans. And if you see the screens of all the dots of the flight patterns and all of that in the air, it's fascinating.
Absolutely.
To know that somebody is there assisted by technology and radar and all the different things that they use to navigate, that they're able to predict and actually safely move people around and land them on time. And, there's weather issues, weather flight patterns, and, engine mechanical issues that they have to, for safety, take, the right steps on. And they shift it around and they make decisions on the fly to adjust, speed up, change flight patterns. And is that sort of the world of this sort of load balancing and storage of cars? Like, oh, we need 10 more over here because the Diamondback games ended early, or
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, this is what the term is coming up now, and it's a hot term: artificial intelligence, or AI. Just the system understanding what that demand is and then trying to account for it. That learning and execution is AI. So again, the airline is a great example. Because a lot of it is an automated process. It is scheduled way in advance. I mean, you can, get a ticket a year in advance. Again, it's a system that is executed upon, but you do have the variables of weather or, mechanical failure and things like that, but that tries to get baked into the system. I think it will be something that will be a lot more fluid though, given, when you're moving 125, 300 passengers at a time. I think it's something where you're really having to do that planning in advance. But here, I think we'll be able to, in essence, have those vehicles or load balance a lot quicker because, we're just talking about 1 or 2 passengers that can be, if we have a vehicle down, there'll probably be a vehicle right behind it that can pick it up, rather than trying to have one airliner down and then trying to find another airliner that, having an airline idle or having an aircraft idle is, that's lost passenger revenue miles. That's huge to a company, right? So that's a much trickier thing to account for. But when you're talking on a per vehicle basis, it's something probably easier to accommodate, but then again, it's a cost that has to be factored in. So, but in the case of having transportation for humans in a 1 to 2 destination location, it's going to be fascinating to see that propagate. So,
yeah, that's interesting. And as you tell these stories, I'm starting to think about. You mentioned artificial intelligence, and are these vehicles, as they're collecting all this data, they potentially could be wonderful opportunities for companies to understand not only the space that they live in. I don't know how that would be integrated into the world. If maybe the future is that's part of search. We're seeing voice, and you see Amazon and Google and these sensors being placed into these multifamily operators, apartment units and single family homes. I have, Echo, I just ask it a question. It gives me the answer. It tells me what I need to tell it, but I also have to learn how to ask the right questions and stuff, but that's, a process.
Right.
But with all these sensors on these vehicles, and you're going to be on a panel with a CEO of an innovative technology company that's bringing these same types of technologies into the apartment. And it's going, these things are learning about us, right? They're learning, even with a Fitbit now connected to a refrigerator, connected to a thermostat, it knows like, hey, your blood pressure. And then maybe it connects to the Amazon Echo and it knows like, hey, you need to get this at the,
don't eat that
Whole Foods.
Yeah. Don't eat that candy bar because I saw you didn't take your 10,000 steps today.
Right. Exactly. Or opens the door and says, here's the gym. But all of this is happening and it's exciting and it's hard to understand because we can't always appreciate what we don't understand. And that's the purpose of this. Just bring up, the conversation, help people understand a little more so they can appreciate the opportunities. But with these vehicles, with all of those sensors, are we looking at the possibility to, like an apartment operator, to really know everything about their competition, where people are parking in real time? Like, hey, there's, an event going on over here, send our, leasing agent over there or what have you.
So I want to also kind of be on the side of caution, because I know that there's some folks are very concerned about whether or not they're being followed, or all this data is being collected about them that's not allowed to. So yes, there's a lot of data that's being collected just in using these vehicles, just so the vehicle can better understand its environment. It has to understand the environment of which it's operating under, which it's an immense amount of data per hour that's being collected from these vehicles. And that's just so that it knows where it is in the world and how to react to it. I think we have yet to come down and really cross that path. And you bring up a great perspective of when, some of that data can be aggregated in the whole. So if I have, 100 vehicles in a certain zip code area that's been operating for the last, 2-3 hours, could they give me also traffic pattern? Could they also give me pedestrian pattern? Could they also give me weather, specific weather information? Could they say that there's a collection or a density of car requests in one area of the valley that's different than the other? Do I have more people going to this store in this hour time frame than another hour? The data could be aggregated and mined, so that could be figured out. Of course, there's we've got to worry about privacy issues. We've got to worry about those kind of things. But that could be an opportunity, because these vehicles will be out there and they need to collect data so that they understand their environment. The question is, do we then take their environmental data and see if we can construe something else from that?
Right.
That's definitely something that could be in the works. Yeah.
And and the nice thing is I know Google's working on these projects, but you've got great people over there that are always going to do the right thing for the user experience.
Yes,
that's the thing, is like you can forecast that and say, I'm just curious as a user though, like, would you be able because right now you can ask, your Amazon Echo or, even your Siri or whatever with voice, and voice is moving into the new search. And so with all this data, if that would be accessed, it could just be a question of, what's the most popular, men's shirt.
Right.
And if there's all of this data and it's being collected, then maybe it's not an opinion anymore of InStyle magazine or GQ magazine. It's actual, this is what everybody's wearing.
Right.
Or I don't know. I'm just. So Well, when you start thinking about how it can improve your life, I think most, like even me, it's like you just subscribe. But you also look back when the internet came alive with access, people were afraid to buy online, right? I mean, it was like, someone's gonna steal your credit card. So there's always that fear, and
now it's a $600 billion industry.
Right. Now there's patents around it, and everything like that. And so I think you're right. I mean, people always, you resist, and that's kind of the type of research I think you're trying to accomplish is understand those human elements to this package.
Yeah, we want to understand the behavioral and how can we make this integrate correct, because we're not going to go from one day. It's not going to be a light switch on and then off. It's going to be a 5-year, 10-year progress until we get to all vehicles being autonomous, if that's what we want it to be, right? So how can we behaviorally start to accept this and integrate this into what we're doing, get people excited, educate them, and better understand where the technology is going, and try to understand that early in the process so that we don't go create something that says, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. It's going to change your world. But then nobody buys it. Nobody wants it because maybe we didn't look at the behavioral issues and the factors that could have helped to integrate this into our lives, right? Because if it doesn't help save us time or money, then, at the end of the day, why use it,
Right. Well, it's wonderful. And even, there's the demographics of all this too, like, the millennials that grew up or even the next generation are growing up in a digital world. And then there's the aging population. You have the seniors that maybe are still trying to understand different elements of how to interact with different technologies. And there's things that could benefit them, even in moving patients around to hospitals. And, that is problematic now. Someone's got to take off work,
right?
Go shuttle help a family member or what have you. And if there's these different tools available, you're talking about actually impacting health, in senior communities and things like that. And
yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I actually just did that a few weeks back for my mother. She's actually
in
the Valley, and she lives in one of the apartment communities up north, Carefree Highway. And I wasn't able to, I could not make it work. I couldn't get there to shuttle her. So she obviously had never used one of the ride sharing platforms. So I just called her up a Lyft, and, she thought it was the most amazing. I said, you don't have to worry about anything. Does he know where I'm going? Yeah, he knows where we're going. And I, just confirmed with the driver, said, you're going to pick up my mom, and okay. And it was so seamless, and she was absolutely amazed that something like that could happen. So again, kind of back to the experience. I think once we have people actually experience the technology, I think they'll be much more accepting of it.
Yeah, that's true. Are there any lasting thoughts you want to leave our listeners with before we wrap up our show? This has been a great conversation. Love to have you, and you'll be speaking at our annual summit. So
Absolutely.
We're looking forward to meeting, those that are listening. You can have an opportunity to meet Marcus here at the Multifamily Leadership Summit. And so we'll be exploring this topic.
I appreciate you having me, and I look very much forward to the summit. I'm very passionate and very excited about this time. As we were talking with coffee, this is the Wild West for transportation again. It's kind of the internet startup time, the 99, 2000 time it was for internet. Here it is for transportation. So, so many opportunities, so many different angles you could look at. So definitely find a way to get engaged now with autonomous driving, with vehicles, with the technology, understand it better, because it is going to be here, and it will transportate and do things for our lives that we never thought about. So
that's wonderful. All right, Marcus, I appreciate you coming on, and you have a great day.
Okay, thank you.
If you get a few moments, please subscribe, rate, and review this show on iTunes or on your own favorite platform. This helps others discover our program, and it tells us that we are doing a good job.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the Multifamily Leadership Podcast. For show notes and other resources, visit multifamilyleadership.com.